So we've got 45 minutes to make the world a better place. That's our brief for the next section on the vitally important area of course, diversity, inclusion, and representation in advertising itself. And we're going to look at a cross-section of different sort of markets so that we get a clear sense of what's going on in the world. It's a really important topic, and we've had a good build-up from Brinsley throughout the day, so we're feeling the pressure of that and trembling. And I won't tell you the advice Jeff gave me, but fans of RuPaul will know what I'm talking about. So this is our illustrious panel. We've got Lara from Nigeria, we've got Paavana from the US, and Brian from the US as well, Virginie from Luxembourg, Marcela from El Salvador, and Jenny from South Africa as well. So we've got lots and lots to cover. There's lots that we could cover. We're not going to cover everything, and we're not going to solve all of the world's problems in the next 45 minutes, but we're going to give it a good try. And Tesco's motto is every little helps. So we're going to plant some seeds, and I've got every faith that this is the panel to improve the world in the next sort of 45 minutes or so. One of the things that I just wanted to flag is that diversity and inclusion covers a whole range of subjects, and we're going to touch on some of them, not all of them, partly because of time constraints, and it's reductive to reduce them to a list like this. But these are the sorts of things I just thought we'd put on the screen. They're covered in the UK by the Equalities Act, and they're the important strands in many different markets. So it's important to keep all of these things in mind, including, you know, disability and age and things that don't really get much of an airing, and we'll touch on that as we go as well. So, with that, let's start. Over to Jenny.
Geraint.
Can you tell us what's the lay of the land in South Africa?
Hi, everyone. Thanks. It's really great to be in a room with people, like real live people, and not just staring at a screen. So thanks for coming. As it is everywhere, I mean, we have such a diverse country with so many different groups of people that are represented in across the board. So you can imagine advertising really does try to speak to as many people as possible, and believe it or not, we still get it wrong. I think it's always just a word of warning to people who want to advertise in South Africa that we do have a self-regulatory body called the Advertising Regulatory Board, and it has a set of general principles that are the guiding lights for all advertisers that want to put adverts into the market in South Africa. And there are certain general principles that prohibit certain claims being made in relation to products, and many of those relate to offensive advertising, and specifically claims that are gender-based, gender stereotypes, or any form of discrimination. So on your left, top left, was, wow, I mean, you really could not do much worse than that. And what made it worse was that it came on the eve of Women's Day, which is quite a big celebration in South Africa. It's celebrated on the 9th of August every month, and it was the day in history where many famous South African women marched to the Union buildings in Pretoria to lay down their demands for equality. This particular advert, actually, there wasn't even time for a complaint to be filed, because Twitter managed to awaken BIC to the fact that they had stepped in the world's largest doo-doo ever by suggesting that somehow you have to be like a girl, but you have to think like a man, and you have to be like a boss. So it unleashed an absolute storm on Twitter, and very wisely, BIC pulled the advert themselves. So that's just a good lesson in how to get it completely wrong. In fact, there was an interesting quote from someone who said, "What about look like a boy, act like a man, think like a woman, and work like a boss?" So try to turn the tables. The other three examples that I have here, the two at the bottom are video clips, and I will share them with you. Due to time constraints, we weren't able to download them for you, because they are particularly interesting because they've turned the corner on how we portray certain stereotypes in South Africa. So I don't know if you want me to talk about it now, or if you want to rather come back to talk. Can I keep going?
Yes.
All right, yes. Great. So the lady that you see in the top right-hand corner, her name is Lesego Tlhabi. She is a famous South African comedian, also known as Coconut Kells. So to understand the South African context of being referred to as a coconut, it means that you are dark on the outside, but you're white on the inside. Now, I understand that in some countries that would be regarded as derogatory, and I have friends who call me a reverse coconut, which I have to sort of sometimes wrap my head around that, but it is not. It's become like part of local speak, and people, if you're called a coconut, I think a lot of African people may be offended by it. But coconut kills is the epitome of a black lady who uses stereotypes for what would ordinarily be regarded as very white-dominated stereotypes, and she uses that to promote certain products. She's actually become the face of takealot.com, which is South Africa's biggest online retailer, and her adverts are brilliant because she speaks like a rich white kugel. She's really, really, really very funny. So I'll share those adverts with you. There have been no complaints about any of the adverts because I think it's humorous, so there's a little bit of parody, but I think she pushes the envelope on everything, from politics to social issues, and it's said in such a way that you would expect a typically white person to make those claims and you'd cringe, but because she says it, it's like amusing. She's actually written a very great book, which is also available, but I'm not here to punt her book.
You're not her agent, are you, or her lawyer?
No, I'm not actually. I wouldn't mind being. Nice idea. The advert at the bottom was a promotion that was started about 2 years ago. It was a collaboration between We the Brave, which some of you may know is part of the Elton John AIDS Foundation, and a South African men's health organization that tried to promote the use of condoms. And the advert is just a man sitting at a dinner table with two young men alongside, and the gentleman in the background is the father of one of these two sons, and it's just these two men gazing beautifully and adoringly at one another, and the next thing, there's this music, and they get up and they have this huge smooch, and the father in the background is completely horrified, and the next thing, it sort of cuts to an image of a condom pack being opened, and it unleashed a wealth of consumer complaints. And just to paint the context a little bit for you, South Africa is still quite a conservative society, despite the fact that we have a constitution that embraces equality. I think a lot of people still viewed this as shocking. They said it was offensive. And as I mentioned to you, it's one of the grounds on which you can file a complaint with the ASA that it's offensive. And of course, offensive to whom? You know, that's the question really. How big is your market? How are you going to determine what is offensive and what is not? And the ASA came out and said, no, it is not offensive. Simply because you have two men kissing, it doesn't make it offensive, certainly not at all. So that was quite a landmark decision and one that we were all very happy about. So that's just the landscape for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. And we'll skip across to the US. And we'll ask Paavana just to talk us through this other example. This is another Primark example that...
yeah, not to single them out today or anything like that. But so this is another case against Primark. As background, the Children's Advertising Review Unit, KRU, which is the self-regulatory organization in the States that regulates advertising directed to children, just earlier this year in January issued a new guideline specifically saying advertising shouldn't portray or encourage negative social stereotyping, prejudice, or discrimination. So sort of as its first test case, they brought this case against Primark. They were advertising two lines of clothing. You had girls' clothes and you had boys' clothes. On the girls' clothes, there were slogans like always perfect, grateful, humble, and optimistic. And on the boys' clothes, they said champion, born to win, and change the game. So KRU's view was that this created a dichotomous world of goals and attributes for those appropriate to girls and those appropriate to boys. But boys should only aspire to be strong, assertive, and go to action, but for girls to be well-behaved, humble, and agreeable. And in KRU's view, this was harmful to each gender's development, to their mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being. So it makes sense to me that KRU would go in this direction, typically because they're regulating advertising directed to a very impressionable audience. But what's interesting to me is that now the NAD, the National Advertising Division, which is a self-regulatory organization that regulates general national advertising, came out just a few weeks ago with additional guidance saying that they are now going to regulate advertising that portrays or encourages harmful and misleading social stereotyping, prejudice, or discrimination. I think it's really interesting that the NAD stuck the word misleading in there. As many of you know, the NAD, like KRU, because it's self-regulatory, doesn't have the authority to actually impose or levy fines or civil penalties on advertisers that it finds has violated its guidelines. But it can, of course, refer cases to the FTC, which regulates deceptive advertising under Section 5 of the FTC Act. So to me, this seems like a soft paving of the way for the NAD to potentially refer advertising that has misleading stereotypes in it to the FTC in the hopes that the FTC might in fact regulate that as misleading advertising. I think it'll be really interesting to see where the enforcement landscape takes us. We're obviously a few steps behind some other countries in actually starting to regulate this, but I do think it'll be an interesting few months and years.
Thank you, thank you. Maybe we'll skip back to Europe before we go to El Salvador for a second and see Luxembourg. That's a pretty relaxed country, to use a gender stereotype, or not a gender stereotype, but a national stereotype. Not the first one today, Brinsley, we've noted them. The Australians are not happy, understandably. Everything's fine, isn't it, in Luxembourg, or do you still see examples of these sort of gendered adverts?
Yeah, well, just a little bit to come back. Well, Luxembourg is, as you may know, really small. It's surrounded by Germany, Belgium, and France. So we have a lot of advertising coming from those countries. And in Luxembourg, first, when we talk about the panel, I thought, but it's not really an issue, meaning that I thought that we have nothing really done really in terms of stereotypes. And when I look into it, I saw that finally I can find a lot of stereotypes in advertising, especially gender, where you can find, for example, advertising for Father's Day, color in blue, and for Mother's Day, color in pink. So this is really, really kind of stereotypes that is in Luxembourg.
Interesting. And in the UK, of course, we have our gender stereotyping rules that were introduced to try and tackle exactly that problem. Marcela, can you tell us in El Salvador if you have similar issues, if there's any regulatory activity? Do you have any examples? We've got a few on the screen you can talk us through, maybe.
I have some examples. In El Salvador, we used to have the Council of Advertisement Ethics, and it was closed like about a year ago. It was closed because of government issues. So they had a code, an ethics publicity code that regulated advertisement and regulated a lot of discrimination and race, religion, and all those type of things. But now the Directory of Consumer Protection is the one that regulates those things. But just if you want to go and said that something is not done good, or if you want to ban an advertising. Here we have this telephone company. They've been like having some advertisement in regard to, here we have an old man, a wealthy man, that this is a stereotype, because the wealthy men, they used to have, or they can buy anything and they can get anything what they want. So this telephone company mentions in the advertisement that it is all inclusive. If you buy a telephone from their company, you will have all inclusive service. So they put a woman on the side saying that this is all inclusive. So they banned the commercial and they took it down, and they were sanctioned. And this telephone company has had a lot of advertisements like this kind, and they've been banned and they've been sanctioned several times, but they like insist. And so I don't know what they are thinking about. And the other company, this is a multinational company, Teleperformance. They are one of the few companies in El Salvador that has been working in inclusion. They have their own code of ethics and conduct in which they are not allowed to reject anyone because of the race, because of the religion, or because of their gender or whatever, to work in their company. And these commercials and these ads, they've been like running around the whole year through, and not because it's been like Pride Month or because it's Women's Month, but they have published all these advertisements during the whole year. So they've been like trying to promote inclusion in their company, and there have been an example for the other companies in El Salvador, national and international companies.
Interesting, thank you. Thank you. And Lara, in Nigeria, what's the situation there in terms of gender stereotyping in advertising? Is it commonplace? Is there activity in terms of regulation?
Thanks, Geraint. Thank you for having us here today. So in Nigeria, advertising has become highly regulated. Recently, we've had an act actually passed. So, of course, there are gender stereotypes. Being called a coconut in Nigeria is a total no-no. Okay, so you will be totally upset. If I was called a coconut, that's totally out of order. So it's interesting because we're in the same continent. However, the advert I wanted to actually talk about, I don't have a slide up, is regard to it was a tech company, actually a telephone company, who had an advert of a man. So he's like a helpless man who goes to the market. Traditionally, a woman would go to the market and she would know what to buy. So it's not, so this is an informal market. So and this is highly unlikely, okay, to happen in the first place. So he goes into the market and he's totally lost, as I think traditionally would expect him to be. But he's got his phone. And he gets on the phone, video calls his wife, who's at home with her twins. So she's directing him as to which stall to go to. She wants vegetables. He goes to one store and she goes, no, not that one. So they're using the phone as, a means of communication. So he succeeds in buying everything he's supposed to buy, or he's instructed to buy by his wife. And as he steps out of the market, another helpless man steps in and he goes, how did you do that? And he waves his phone saying, look, call your wife, kind of thing. So, I mean, obviously, you could look at it, in various different ways. Really, are men as helpless as we think they are? Probably not. And is a woman only there to give instructions? So that was one of the messages that went out. But it aired for quite a long time, and there wasn't any complaint, as far as I can tell.
Thank you. It's an interesting area, isn't it? Because, there are stereotypes that one might expect when looking at some adverts, but actually there are different points of view as well. And in the US, I imagine, Brian, it's sort of similar to the UK, that would be a negative stereotype both for the man and the woman, as it is in Nigeria.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And what's so important about this topic, I think, and what's so great that we talk about these things so much more than we ever did, at least during the span of my career, is I think about all of the messages I was bombarded with as a child. And especially when you're a child and you're watching television more than most of us watch it now, even now on our small phones. And there are ads that to this day I can recite from start to finish. Mikey, Life cereal, I don't know if that ran internationally. I can do that one. And the other one I can do is for Calgon. I wish I had thought to bring this. It's an absolutely terrible commercial from the 1970s. And I don't know if anyone in this room knows it and remembers it. But it's a Chinese couple who work at a laundry, which is a stereotype. And it also has gender stereotypes because there's a husband and a wife. The wife solves the problem by using logic because the husband is inept. But he's the one who's in the front, who's doing business with the customer. And I can literally recite that ad from start to finish. And what did that reinforce in my young brain when I was watching that? And for all of us to be thinking about these issues, and look, we're lawyers. Nobody asks us about creative decisions, ever. We are the destruction of creative. We are the ones who ruin everything. So we don't get the primary role here. Sometimes, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience, we get to say, hey, have you thought about this? Maybe, just an outside voice, an outside perspective. But we're not influencing things necessarily directly that way. But I think it's really important to recognize that, as the world is starting to change and as diversity and inclusion is part of hiring, it is a giant part of the most conservative corporations in the world that are driving this issue well beyond our government in the United States and probably well beyond any government out there. it's going to change things because marketing people are now more diverse. And there are more people in the room who are going to raise their hand, so I will not be bombarded with those racist, sexist messages constantly. And so what's so interesting about this is, our NAD, our self-regulatory system is finally in the game, which is great. I applaud that. But it's really the companies that are moving things, yet their ads aren't quite there yet. And that's the disconnect I don't really understand. I don't understand why the ads aren't as diverse as the entertainment content that we look at. And that's a hard question that some marketing executive, some marketing professor at Wharton will get tenure exploring that. And hopefully it's going to change.
Yes. And certainly we've seen examples. I mean, cast your mind back 10 years, those of you in the UK. And I think in the US, where there was a Heinz advert that had two men kissing and it was pulled at the last moment by the actual advertiser. And I think the ASA was involved in saying that actually had this been investigated by us, which it wasn't, we would have been totally fine with it. That it's obviously not offensive in any way, shape or form. I'm looking at guys just to see a nod.
Yeah,
Is that roughly right?
Although young people that we've showed that ad to recently don't like the gender stereotyping in the ad. It wasn't the kind of kiss between the two men. It was the fact that the man dressed up as the wife was playing the wife's role, and the man dressed up as the husband was okay.
Yes, it's an interesting one. I think gender has become a more complex conversation in lots of different markets, and certainly we're now, opening our minds more and more. There are, non-binary people, there are non-sort of gender-conforming individuals in ads, and it's great to see that representation increasingly. And a good example that Brian reminded me of actually in the UK is that we had a drag queen appearing, bag of chips, if any fans are in an ad for McCain oven chips. And that received a similar sort of negative reaction, albeit a slightly different one, and probably an unexpected one, because drag race and drag seems to be part of UK culture and Western culture and broader culture, but that received a hugely negative reaction, probably because it was the wrong target market. But anyway, we can talk about these different strands and sensitivities, but they do spill into each other quite a lot. And Lara, if I come back to you, in terms of other sensitivities and other areas where you're seeing strands of diversity and inclusion that are being represented particularly well or particularly badly, is there anything you can tell us maybe about these examples that we can see?
Yeah, so
this example, I think.
Yeah, so this is so one of the things that we do. I mean, various tribes in Nigeria we have a traditional wedding, so it's like an engagement party, huge one. So before you have the regular either church or Islamic celebration. So this particular advert is it's fantastic actually, because it's this young lady is blind, and the way, so ordinarily you would come in as a bride, either being led by your friends or you're brought in. So clearly she wasn't going to be able to do that by herself. So she's got a Bluetooth earphone in her ear, and her husband to be is guiding her. So he literally tells her, turn left, turn right, so you go to the in-laws first before you come over to meet your husband. So literally he directs this traditional ceremony with the MTN line and his earpiece, and he's also speaking to her till literally at the end of it, you see her white stick, and that's how you know that she's blind. So that really, that's one of the good ones. I mean, there are other ones that are not so good, but we won't talk about that.
It's good to focus on the positive. Jenny, are there any standout good examples, do you think, in South Africa that stand out?
Nike ran an advert, might have been last year or the year before, with Caster Semenya, who I don't know, many of you know her. She's a South African Olympic athlete, and she's really had to fight to stay competing. And the advert is particularly heartwarming. It's actually beautiful. And I think it just, in such a simple way, celebrates how she addresses the world in the advert by saying, would it be easier for you if I didn't run? Would it be easier for you if I didn't win? Would it be easier for you if I was less manly looking and look more like a girl? Would it be? And I think those are the type of adverts that challenge people to consider just, Brian mentioned it now when he said that companies are becoming more aware of how they should address their audiences, which hopefully won't make us redundant one day in our jobs if we have to clear ads and that. But I think it is important that there's an awareness of what is the relevant market, who are you speaking to, and I think the relevant market isn't necessarily what the relevant market was for a particular brand or a particular product so many years ago. Just the Heinz baked beans example, which you would think would be fairly innocuous, just may have resonated so many years ago, but it no longer does. And Brian, thanks for just mentioning the 70s and making us feel like we all knew those adverts from way back then. So I think that's the issue, is just some advertisers just get it right. They're just able to identify. MTN is a South African mobile telephone network service that expanded its service to Nigeria, and they have been particularly inclusive in the way in which they do their advertising, speaking to a wide variety of people and getting their message across. So yeah.
Interesting. And that's exactly the right point about, companies are becoming very aware, and have been aware actually for a long time, and becoming increasingly reactive, I suppose, to criticism. In your markets, are you seeing that happening via the regulatory sort of official channels, or are you seeing it more on social media? Does anyone have any thoughts? Lara?
So regulatory, yes. Jeff met the Jeff met the Director General of the newly formed Regulatory Council, and they're very on it. I mean, literally, even if you do make an advert through social media, send an email. We had a bank one that we featured at our last meeting where it was quite offensive, and they were on them. So they regulatory, yes, and sometimes you'll self-regulate yourself. And to go to what I think Brian said earlier, I think marketers really should get the lawyers in as early as possible, so that you don't waste all that money only to have some regulators say no. Also, I think culture and tradition is very important. So in Nigeria, as inclusive as MTN is, there's so much that they cannot do because they must adhere to the law. So there are various parts of society that are not recognized in Nigeria or in Africa, most countries. And so they will not, those adverts will not show. And if they do try to sneak them in, then they'll just be slapped with a fine. And there'll be an offense apart from that, yeah.
Interesting. It's good to see regulators stepping up to this challenge, because it seems to be there is a global trend towards improving representation right across the board. Everyone's approaching it slightly differently, but it seems to be a general trend. Virginie, in Luxembourg, is this a highly regulated space, or again, does it?
It's not regulated itself, but I think we can see now a little change. It's really slow, but there's a change, so it's a good point into companies. I just have one example. Well, in 2012, we had an ad for the Luxembourg telecom company, where you have on TV, three boys and a father watching a soccer game. That was the ad in 2012, and in 2022, so last September, we had an ad where it was the Luxembourg women's soccer team playing, really promoting for inclusion, more diversity, like everybody, we all share the same values, we like soccer, and that's the point.
Excellent. And women tend to be better at soccer in the UK, I have to say, at the moment especially. The proof is in the results. How about in El Salvador? What's the situation in terms of, are we looking at regulatory fines, or are we talking about social media responses?
No, mostly social media. We don't have that much regulation. And some companies, they try, but we're very conservative. And they just stick to what they know and what people will accept. And for example, for Mother's Day, the publicity is focused on what women were used to, like cleaning the houses and being at home. So much of the publicity for Mother's Day is selling laundries or selling something that they will use for the house, because they were used to work at home and not be professionals. And the other way around for Father's Day, it's like, barbecue or television because they like to watch the soccer games or whatever. So it's mostly like they have not changed. They are trying. We have this company that has been like measuring and has been analyzing or certifying companies that are willing to change and that have been changing for inclusion, and they are measuring and they are trying to certify these kinds of companies. And there's like one telephone company that was not the one that I mentioned, and the ad for the teleperformance company, that they are trying to be more inclusive. But I think because they are multinational companies, but the national companies are still like in the old-fashioned way, and we don't have that much regulation unless somebody feels like the ad or the advertisement campaign, it's like they don't feel that it's appropriate, so they will go to the consumer protection or.
Yes, and I think it's an evolving picture across the board, isn't it? And in the US, Paavana and Brian, are there any updates in the last few months? Are things changing quickly there still, or?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think the biggest updates are the updates to the KRU guidelines in January, and then that addition to the NAD guidelines a few months ago. So I think other than in children's advertising, we haven't seen much actual enforcement. I think it's coming down the pipeline. On one hand, sort of a shame these principles have to be codified into law to say to companies, hey, you should create advertising with integrity that respects these various values and issues. But I also think if it inspires companies to turn inward and really look at how they're creating their advertising and be more thoughtful, that is a good thing. I also think as lawyers, it may change the way we advise our clients. I think I've definitely had those moments where I'm like, have you guys really thought about what this ad is saying and how it comes off? But now it can be like, you could move the needle from PR risk to this could be actual, financial risk for you. So I can destroy even more advertising ideas than I did before. And that's always very satisfying. So.
I think the PR risk, actually, the danger of a big PR problem scares them more than a legal
Maybe.
risk. So
depends on the client.
So the only thing I would add to that, I mean, yes, I think things are clearly moving in the right direction, but sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 2 steps back. And, numbers talk. There's this thing that happens every January in the United States. It's a big American football game that they call the Super Bowl. I've never actually watched it. But it's a big platform for advertisers, and I do watch the ads. And last year in 2022, during the game itself, there's a pre-game, there's a post-game. The thing goes on forever. I myself watch a marathon of RuPaul's Drag Race myself, so that's fine. But there was one ad only that had any gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer content, just one. And that's the most expensive airtime, most expensive advertising time that we sell in the United States. That says it all. That's not where they're spending their money. And so that's going to change, and it's been different in prior years. There has been progress. I don't want to be negative about it. But everybody signs pledges. We talk about it. What matters is what we do.
Yes, absolutely. And, tokenism is that other strand of that, isn't it? Being too selective, celebrating something only for a month of the year.
There's a lot of gay ads in the United States in June, because that's Gay Pride Month. And I know it's Breast Cancer Month right now in the United States. There's lots of breast cancer ads. And it's the same, I think. We've talked about that before.
With us, yes, Women's Month is March. So all the banks will have programs and incentives for women to save their money, so they're women-friendly for that month. We'll have Children's Day adverts, Children's for May, promoting children accounts. So you find that, yes, and once that's done, it's gone. We don't have any Pride adverts in Nigeria. Because the law just doesn't recognize that part of society. The one thing that I didn't mention is there's a new law or new requirement in Nigeria from the 1st of October that all adverts will not have any foreign voiceovers or foreign models. So it has to be local talent. They're trying to develop local talent. The argument is we have 200 million people. And if you're going to be advertising to us, you should be able to find a suitable model and voiceover, accent, language, whatever it is, to place that advert in Nigeria.
Interesting. Obviously controversial in different contexts, but yes, some of the motivations are shared in some countries more than others, and that's interesting. And on the topic of tokenism and sort of 1 month of the year, I'm looking at you, Marcela, I was thinking of, you were talking about disability awareness as well, and that's something that's celebrated, but only briefly in the year, is that right?
Yes. We had it September 30th, and this is this organization that recollects money and donations for disabilities to have their to go to the doctor and to have everything paid and to have everything that they need. But it's just like this year was September 30 and October 1st that it was the Children's Day, October 1st. So they focus mostly on children and disabilities in children. And this goes just during the month that they are going to do this campaign. And then during the year, they don't do anything about disability or recollect money or donations or anything, but just during the time that they are going to have this organization and this recollection.
Interesting. And it's a similar problem, I think, across the board. Disability, visibility in advertising. There's a campaign in the UK that most of you will be aware of if you're from the UK, promoting Maltesers, which was absolutely fantastic. It was, I can share a link. I'm not going to explain it to you, but I can share a link to anybody who's interested and hasn't seen it. But the problem is it's exceptional in that it came about sort of 6 or 7 years ago, I think, and we haven't seen anything as incredible since, and it certainly hasn't become the norm or the default to be seeing people with different disabilities and various abilities. So it's a difficult subject to bring up and difficult to represent in a sort of brief ad, and that's sometimes the excuse that's used, isn't it, that stereotypes, we have to lean on them because it's always too complicated to explain a backstory in a short amount of time. But it can be done, I think, really successfully. Does anyone have any other sort of thoughts on LGBT strands, for example, in markets? I understand that it's sort of controversial in some countries more than others and not allowed in some countries. But in America, is this being taken seriously in terms of, is it becoming so sensitive that nobody's touching it because there's so much sort of cancelling happening, or is it not that?
No, I don't think so. I think that representation has definitely increased, despite the example that I gave. I think that example just shows that when it really matters, the money's not being spent. And I can't get that angry about representation during the special months, because on the one hand, I'm like, thank you. I feel like having that representation is really important. And I cry at those ads too. They pull on your heartstrings. But I just want everyone to be better. And, it's nice not to be forgotten over the course of the year. And, let's not forget that we don't have the regulatory, there's not a tremendous amount in any of our countries, really, of regulatory action here. But there is a tremendous amount of social media action. And that's where the real power is. And you will be called out as a hypocrite if you are just walking the walk and not talking the talk and not walking the walk. And I think that, that's why I do find that the clients that I work with are very sensitive to that kind of potential risk or issue that you raise with them.
And we can probably turn to your example, actually, of that.
This is a fun example done by an agency called Virtue, which is actually owned by Vice, the media company. And I'll tell you just a little bit about it. It's sort of like a public service announcement and awareness, and it was issued this July, which is immediately following Gay Pride Month in the United States. The performer you're going to see, look, I know a lot of drag queens. I have to admit, I didn't know this one. I had to Google it. Marty Cummings, who is an activist and a performer in New York. She also ran for our city council, and she did not win. And I don't think I need to say anything else about it if you want to play it, but she makes a point, and I think that everyone in this panel and probably in this room will understand and agree with it.
Excellent. We'll play this. It goes on for about 1.5 minutes, and then we'll take any questions and thoughts that anybody has, but enjoy this when it plays.
Hi, I'm Marty Cummings, famous drag queen, politician, and skinny legend. Every June we see it happening. Rainbows. Everywhere. Shirts, sweaters, cat sweaters. Wow, that's hideous. Mouthwash, credit cards, even lean protein.
Gaylicious.
We spoke to one member of the LGBTQ community who says, "Oh no."
Yeah, people are so quick to jump on the Pride bandwagon to make money without actually supporting the community. That's like so homophobic.
Running a Pride campaign while donating to anti-LGBTQ politicians? Bad rainbow washing. Rainbow washing your merch that's produced in a country where it's illegal to be queer? Bad rainbow washing. Whatever that was. Bad rainbow washing. But now you can rainbow wash without hurting or exploiting members of the queer community. Introducing Super Rainbow Wash Soap, the only acceptable way to rainbow wash. Washing up with our Super Rainbow Wash? Good rainbow washing. Scrubbing those pits? Good rainbow washing. Cleansing your palate from another month of horrible Pride merch? Good rainbow Oh my God, rainbow washing. It's for bodies, not profit. So next Pride, when the itch to rainbow wash comes back, wash it away with Super Rainbow Wash.
Order today. All net proceeds go to the LGBTQ+ community. And check out our other products like the International Women's Day Mansplation Bible and our Black History Month Not a Token Moment Charm Bracelets.
I think that covers a lot of ground, probably says it all. With that, thank you very much to this panel. It's been really, really interesting. And I'll just say a thank you, and then we can go over to Q&As more generally in a moment. But thank you very much.